Welcome back to another video. Today, we're just going to talk a little bit about the ongoing discussions relative to tariffs that President Donald Trump has initiated against China, against Mexico, against Canada. I think arguments are really all over the place. They're on both sides of this argument as to whether or not the tariffs are good or bad. I just want to talk about some of the key arguments that I'm hearing. I may share an opinion or two along the way, and I'd really love to hear how you're interpreting what's going on and how it's making you feel. Thanks again for joining me for this discussion. I appreciate your loyalty and interest, and hopefully we can both get some value out of this discussion. I want to start with some of the arguments against these tariffs. I'm recording this video on a Sunday, but on Tuesday of this week, tariffs will be applied to the three countries, China, Mexico, and Canada. There may be other countries included in this. I'm really just focusing on these three for this discussion. But on Tuesday, some big changes will take place. How is this going to affect each of us individually? There's a lot of speculation right now. I want to talk a bit about some of the arguments against these tariffs and how people think these tariffs might impact us negatively. The first is pretty clear. When these tariffs are applied on these countries for importing goods into the United States, basically their costs go up as well. And because of this, that cost is often not absorbed by the company itself because profit margins are usually pretty limited, but rather that is pushed on to the consumer. And so by whatever percentage these tariffs are, in the different sectors, they're at different percentages, anywhere from 10 to I'm seeing 25%. This is passed on to the consumer oftentimes. And so we can expect that in certain sectors, the price of the goods that we enjoy will be going up, especially if those goods are intermingled with products coming from China, Mexico, or Canada. Now, China produces a ton of consumer goods, anything from electronics to toys, you name it, it's probably made in China, and we consume a lot of these goods. So I think that is a little bit harder to pin down. We're going to see all sorts of different costs that increase. In Mexico and Canada, I think there are some closer associations with certain raw materials that are coming from these two countries. We're also going to see this impact our auto industry. There are factories and other things that are contributing to the development of cars. And these costs will be passed on, I think, rather quickly if something isn't done to mitigate this issue. There are other industries involved as well in Canada and Mexico. I think we can look at agricultural, so dairy, meat, some of these types of things. We do get a lot of those products from Mexico and Canada. We'll definitely be seeing some increases in costs on meat and dairy, and other items we'll likely be purchasing in grocery stores. Now, another unintended consequence is often increased price of production. So because of this tariff and other issues which we'll get to, which might include supply chain issues, costs go up. Sometimes labor costs go up. All sorts of costs can go up. And this results in additional increases in the cost of making goods, which again is passed on to the consumer in most cases. I think in particular, this increase might affect farmers and agricultural industries in Mexico and Canada. So we can expect some of those goods and the prices of those goods to increase if this remains in effect. Now, another potential impact might be to the labor force. In some cases, when manufacturers have to increase costs around production and just to export their goods to another country, that results in less money to provide jobs for individuals working in those different industries. And so because of that, it could result in workforce reductions. Not just reductions, this could also result in lowering of salaries because previous salaries are no longer able to be met. It could also result again in just generally higher prices in order to meet and offset that increase in labor cost. Now, I think one of the bigger impacts might be the spillover of inflation globally. Because the United States is imposing these tariffs, often there's a tit-for-tat approach. Other countries will respond in kind and do something very similar to the United States. This may also start to impact other countries, between and among countries globally. And the end result of this is just global inflation that is hard to keep pace with. The US is a major driver for the global economy, and so a big change like this definitely will have ripple effects across the world. It's a bit unclear exactly what this will look like in practice, and it's also unclear as to whether or not President Trump intends to use these tariffs as a negotiation tactic and lighten them as we progress to further negotiations, or if this is just the new norm and he intends to instate these tariffs and leave them as is. I think there are a lot of questions in and around that particular issue, and there is a pattern definitely from the previous term under Donald Trump whereby he would exercise these extreme actions and then use that as leverage to get other countries to sit at a negotiation and discuss different alternatives. I'm anticipating that to happen in the next month or so, but at the same time, there's always a chance that the response is different and more acute and more aggressive. And so I think there are a lot of questions that still remain unanswered and will be answered in time. Now that leads me directly into some of the arguments that are being presented by advocates of these tariffs. The very first is to address a trade deficit that exists. So the United States imports more goods from these countries collectively than it does export. And so because of that, there is a deficit. In other words, we owe more money to the countries whose goods we are bringing into the country versus those we're selling to those countries, which increases our deficit within the United States. Now, some might argue that this is not necessarily the problem of the global economy or the other countries because we are choosing to import these goods and we want these goods. But this is a tactic to help alleviate some of that stress and potentially lower that deficit. Another potential benefit might be to encourage domestic manufacturing, to bring back a lot of the jobs and skills and labor that formerly did reside in the United States but was exported or found overseas because it could be found at a cheaper price. Well, that may no longer hold true if these tariffs end up standing in place. And in that case, it would encourage different companies to invest in infrastructure and the ability to manufacture here in the United States, which would thereby offer additional jobs and other benefits. It's still unclear as to how this might affect inflation in the long run. But in general, I think most people would agree that it would be great to have more domestic manufacturing capability to reduce our reliance on other countries and to encourage more domestic manufacturing growth. Now, this dives right into our next topic, which is national security. When you have a dependence on other countries for critical resources, that does expose vulnerability. So if this initiative is designed to bring back some of those critical skills and capabilities that represent risks to national security, that could be a positive thing for the United States in the long term. Advocates argue that this is exactly what will happen, and that some of our dependencies are creating a national security vulnerability. Having a strong domestic industrial base is and has been important for the growth of the United States over many years, and definitely has been eroded over the last number of decades as we've looked for cheaper prices and cheaper options outside of the United States. And so we've covered some pros and we've covered some cons for the tariffs. Now, what do I think ultimately will happen here? I think there should be a negotiation and perhaps some change in how the trade agreements are structured between the United States and some of these other countries. That said, these agreements are very delicate. They require balance. And when the United States is working with both allies and adversaries, there has to be an incentive, a balance, in order to successfully achieve a result that has a good outcome for everyone. If we just prioritize the United States over every other country, ultimately that may be a very negative thing for the United States. Because this is a financial independence channel, and I'm very passionate about this topic, the one major issue that I see has to do with inflation. If all of these policies do stay in effect, and if people become petty on both sides, and we end up in a world where these tariffs are applied on all fronts across the globe, global inflation is a serious concern. We're still running a bit hot if you look at the latest information relative to inflation. Now, this is hot compared to a target rate of 2% that the Fed has established. We're still slightly over that amount. Now, one solution that might be brought to bear to alleviate some of the suffering of the American people is to establish more programs that put more money into the hands of the American people to help them get through this inflationary period and afford the goods and services that they need. Unfortunately, that's a decision that tends to have very negative effects in the long term for the very people who need those subsidies in the first place. If we go back to the period during the COVID pandemic, lots of stipends were handed out to individuals to help people get through the trying times. Now, there certainly was a need for a lot of people to receive these checks, but at the same time, our money supply was increased in profound ways. How did we do this? Well, the Federal Reserve printed money, increased the supply of American currency. When this happens, the increase in supply grows at such a rate that the amount of dollars in circulation, because it's so drastically higher. Let me provide a really simple example. If you and your best friend both have $100 to spend every month on groceries, and there's equilibrium currently in the marketplace, so you go to the grocery store, your $100 buys exactly what you need. Let's say both of you, you and your friend, have 2 children and a partner. This $100 extends perfectly for both of you and covers the price of goods. Then you receive a stimulus check. A stimulus check, let's say, for an additional $50. So you and your friend both now have $150. Now you have more dollars to spend, and typically people spend those extra dollars. Those dollars are typically recirculated into the market, and when additional money is added into the market, more goods are purchased. Well, what does that do? That increases demand for the same supply that existed when you just had $100 per month. And so more goods are purchased, leaving basically a balance of demand being higher than the actual supply that exists. Now, in time, that can catch up. The result of this is typically that the limited supply that is available experiences a price increase. That increase then translates to your increase in salary, effectively making the dollars that you do have worth less because you're not able to buy the same amount of goods for that $150. So even though you went from 100 to 150, because of the supply and demand issues, you actually can buy less with your money. That's what's happening when inflation occurs, and in particular when more money is inserted into the money supply. It makes your purchasing power go down relative to where you were in the past. And oftentimes people are happy with this because they see that they have more money in their bank account, more ability to buy. But this is a mistake to think that in the long run this will work out in your favor. It actually makes the people who are engaging this behavior poorer over time. They lose purchasing power, while those who already have a lot of money are not really affected. They basically take advantage of this type of circumstance by investing in assets, because in addition to the limited supply of groceries, this will also start impacting assets. When more money's in the market, the price of a house will go up to meet the increase in money supply. Therefore, the people who own the assets experience a great increase in their wealth during these types of inflationary periods. It's a very unbalanced system that ultimately improves the lives of those who are already doing quite well and who are making sound financial decisions, and it really detracts from those who are not. I really have no idea what is going to happen, how the Trump administration will deal with these tariffs in the long term, and how other countries react. I'll be watching closely this Tuesday. I see Canada and Mexico have already applied a similar tariff to the United States, and I assume other countries who are impacted by this will do the same. But it will be interesting to see how things pan out. I'd love to hear from you about how this is impacting you, what you're fearful of, what you're excited about. Are you pro-tariff or are you anti-tariff? How do you feel? That would be interesting to learn more. If anything I've said doesn't make sense, or if you disagree with it, that's fantastic. Feel free to share your ideas below in the comments. I'd also greatly appreciate it if you liked the video, if you did enjoy it, and definitely subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It would be great to see that number start to increase slowly. Thanks again for your time today, and I'll look forward to seeing you in next week's video. Take care.